March 20th, 1944. Deep in the Bavarian Alps, Adolf Hitler's mountain retreat, the Berghof, stood as a symbol of Nazi power and invincibility. For 5 years, the fortress had remained untouchable, protected by geography, weather, and the most sophisticated air defenses in the Third Reich. But on that cold March morning, 240 American B-17 flying fortresses took off from bases in England with a single audacious objective: reduce Hitler's sanctuary to rubble. Operation Valkyrie's Hammer would become the most daring daylight bombing raid of World War II, a mission that combined precision, courage, and the burning desire to strike at the heart of Nazi Germany. This is the story of the men who flew that mission, the defenses they faced, and the day the world watched Hitler's fortress burn. This story will leave you breathless. If you love history and aviation, subscribe, hit like, and turn on notifications. Share this incredible story. Comment: what was the most daring defying mission? The target, the Berghof. Even the name carried weight among Allied intelligence circles. Perched at 3,200 feet elevation on the Obersalzberg mountain near Berchtesgaden, Bavaria, Hitler's mountain retreat was more than just a residence. It was a fortress, a command center, and a symbol. From this eagle's nest, Hitler had planned the invasion of Poland, met with Neville Chamberlain before Munich, and directed the early campaigns of the war. The Berghof complex included not just Hitler's residence, but also an extensive bunker system, barracks for SS guards, administrative buildings, and even accommodations for high-ranking Nazi officials. By March 1944, Allied intelligence had compiled extensive documentation on the Berghof. Location: Obersalzberg, approximately 90 miles southeast of Munich. Elevation: 3,200 feet above sea level, surrounded by mountains exceeding 8,000 feet. Defenses: 80 mm flak batteries on surrounding peaks, smoke generators, fighter bases within 20 minutes flight time. Weather: notoriously unpredictable with sudden storms and thick cloud cover common. Strategic value: propaganda and a psychological impact immense. Military value debatable. The challenge was obvious. The Berghof was one of the most heavily defended locations in Germany, in terrain that made precision bombing extraordinarily difficult, with weather that could turn deadly in minutes. It was, by any reasonable assessment, an impossible target, which is exactly why General Karl Tui Spaatz, commander of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe, wanted to hit it. Chapter Part 2. The Proposal. The planning session took place in February 1944 at 8th Air Force Headquarters in High Wycombe, England. Present were General Spaatz, General James Doolittle, commander of the 8th Air Force, Colonel Curtis LeMay, known for his aggressive bombing strategies, and a half-dozen planning officers. "Gentlemen," Spaatz began, spreading reconnaissance photos across the table, "I want to discuss a mission that will either be remembered as brilliant or insane. Possibly both." He tapped the photos. "The Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat. I propose we bomb it into rubble." The room fell silent. Then LeMay spoke. "Sir, the Berghof is 90 miles southeast of Munich in the middle of the Alps. The approaches are limited by mountains, the defenses are extensive, and the weather is terrible." "I'm aware of the challenges, Colonel." "Then you're also aware," LeMay continued carefully, "that a daylight raid on that target would face losses potentially exceeding 20%. That's unsustainable." "It would be," Spaatz agreed, "if this were a routine raid. But this isn't routine. This is psychological warfare. We've been bombing German cities and factories for 2 years. We've destroyed their industrial capacity. But Hitler still stands as a symbol of Nazi invincibility. What happens when we reduce his personal fortress to ashes? What message does that send to the German people? To the Wehrmacht soldiers? To the occupied nations?" Doolittle leaned forward. "You're proposing we trade aircraft and crews for propaganda value? I'm proposing we strike at the enemy's morale in a way that no factory bombing ever could. And yes, the cost will be high. But gentlemen, we're planning the invasion of France. When our boys hit those beaches, I want German soldiers looking over their shoulders, wondering if their own leaders are safe. I want Hitler hiding in a bunker, afraid to show his face. I want the world to see that there is no fortress, no mountain retreat, no sanctuary that American air power cannot reach. The planning officers exchanged glances. The mission was audacious, dangerous, perhaps suicidal, but Spots was right about the psychological impact. How many aircraft? Doolittle asked. I'm thinking big. 240 B-17s from the 8th Air Force, escorted by every P-51 we can spare. We go in at high altitude to minimize flak exposure, but low enough for accurate bombing despite the mountains. Weather? We wait for the right window. Clear skies, minimal wind, we'll need perfect conditions. LeMay studied the reconnaissance photos. The approaches are the key. We can't fly straight in from the north. Too many fighter bases, too much flak. But if we come from the west, following the valleys, we might achieve tactical surprise. Exactly, Spots confirmed. We fly south from our bases in England, cross into Germany west of Munich, then approach the Berghof from the west, using the terrain to mask our approach until the last possible moment. And if Hitler's there when we hit? Someone asked. Spots smiled grimly. Then we've just won the war in one afternoon. Das Part 3. Assembling the Strike Force. The mission was codenamed Valkyrie's Hammer, a reference to the Norse mythology Hitler loved to invoke, turned against him. Over the following 3 weeks, the plan took shape. 240 B-17 flying fortresses would participate, drawn from multiple bomb groups: 91st Bomb Group, 40 aircraft; 303rd Bomb Group, 40 aircraft; 379th Bomb Group, 40 aircraft; 384th Bomb Group, 40 aircraft; 447th Bomb Group, 40 aircraft; 452nd Bomb Group, 40 aircraft. Each B-17 would carry 4,000 pounds of high-explosive bombs, 2,000 pounds of incendiary bombs, maximum fuel load for the extended mission, 10 crew members, 6. 50-caliber machine guns for defense. Fighter escort would consist of 120 P-51 Mustangs providing close escort, 80 P-47 Thunderbolts flying top cover, 60 P-38 Lightning sweeping for German fighters, total force 500 aircraft, 2,400 men, flying one of the deepest penetration missions into Germany attempted to date. The crews selected for the mission were experienced. Most had completed at least 10 missions over Germany, but they weren't told the target until the final briefing. Security was absolute. If word leaked that the Americans were planning to bomb the Berghof, German defenses would be reinforced to impregnable levels. Part 4. The briefing, March 19, 1944, 2100 hours. 6 different air bases across England held simultaneous briefings. The crews filed into briefing rooms, wondering about tomorrow's mission. When the curtain was pulled back, revealing the target map, a collective gasp went through each room. At Bassingbourn Airfield, home of the 91st Bomb Group, Colonel Henry Terrell addressed his crews. Gentlemen, tomorrow we fly the most important mission of the war to date. Our target is the Berghof, Adolf Hitler's personal mountain retreat in Bavaria. Your job is simple. Turn it into rubble. Turn it into ash. Turn it into a memory. He let that sink in for a moment. I won't lie to you. This is the most heavily defended target we've ever hit. The approach is through the Alps. Mountains as high as 8,000 feet, meaning we'll be flying in narrow corridors. The flak will be intense. German fighters will be waiting. And the weather could kill us as surely as enemy fire. Why are we doing this? A pilot called out. Because, Terrell replied, Hitler has sat in that mountain fortress for 5 years, untouched, untouchable. He's bombed London, Paris, Rotterdam. He's started a war that's killed millions. Tomorrow, we show him and the world that there is nowhere he can hide. Tomorrow, we bring the war to his doorstep. The room erupted in cheers. Despite the danger, despite the risks, the psychological appeal of bombing Hitler's personal residence was overwhelming. The briefing continued for 2 hours. Intelligence officers described the defenses, the approach route, the timing. Weather officers predicted clear skies, a rarity for the Alps in March. Navigation officers walked through the complex route that would take them south across Germany, then into the mountainous terrain. Your bomb run will last approximately 90 seconds, the bombardier instructor explained. You'll have one pass, one opportunity. Make it count. Every bomb needs to hit. We're not just destroying buildings. We're destroying a symbol. At 2300 hours, the crews were dismissed. Some went to the chapel. Some wrote letters home. Some tried to sleep, though few succeeded. Tomorrow, they would make history. Chapter 2, Into the Fire. Part 5, Takeoff. March 20th, 1944, 05:30 hours. Across 6 air bases in England, crews climbed aboard their B-17s in the pre-dawn darkness. Engines coughed to life, filling the cold morning air with thunder. Lieutenant Robert Hawk Hawkins climbed through the hatch of his B-17, Memphis Belle II, named in honor of the famous bomber that had completed 25 missions and returned home. Hawk was a 24-year-old pilot from Tennessee, flying his 18th mission. His co-pilot, Lieutenant James Cooper, was already running through pre-flight checks. "Ready for this?" Cooper asked. "Hell of a milk run," Hawk replied with gallows humor. "Just a quick trip to Hitler's house, in and out." What could go wrong? Their crew consisted of 10 men, pilot and co-pilot, navigator, Lieutenant Thomas Wright, bombardier, Lieutenant David Fisher, flight engineer, Staff Sergeant Mike Romano, radio operator, Staff Sergeant Charles Henderson, 4 gunners manning the aircraft's defensive positions. Each man knew his job. Each had trained for months. Each was about to fly the mission of a lifetime. At 05:58 hours, the first B-17 lifted off from Bassingbourn. Every 30 seconds, another bomber followed. The precision was remarkable. 240 heavy bombers taking off in near-perfect sequence, forming up over England before heading south. By 06:45 hours, the entire strike force was airborne and assembled. 240 B-17s in tight formation, surrounded by 260 escort fighters. It was one of the largest air armadas assembled to that point in the war. They set course for Germany. Part 6. The Crossing. The flight across the English Channel was routine. The formation climbed to 25,000 feet, high enough to minimize flak danger, but low enough to maintain formation integrity. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, minimal wind, visibility exceeding 50 miles. "Too perfect," Cooper muttered, scanning the horizon. "Don't jinx it," Hawk replied. They crossed into German airspace at 07:45 hours, approximately 50 miles west of Munich. German radar would have detected them by now. Luftwaffe fighters would be scrambling. Flak batteries would be alerting. The strike force commander, Colonel William Reed, flying in the lead B-17, radioed, "All aircraft, this is lead. Maintain formation. Stay alert. Expected fighter contact in 20 minutes. The fighters came sooner. At 07:52 hours, the first German fighters appeared, Bf-109s and FW-190s, approximately 40 aircraft diving from altitude. The P-51 escorts immediately engaged, peeling off to intercept. The sky erupted into a massive dogfight. Hawk watched through his cockpit window as a P-51 chased a Bf-109 past his wing, their contrails drawing white lines across the blue sky. Tracer rounds stitched through the air. An FW-190 exploded in a ball of fire. A P-51 tumbled past, trailing smoke, its pilot already bailed out. "Fighters, 12 o'clock high," the top turret gunner called. 2 Bf-109s were diving directly toward Memphis Belle II. Hawk held formation. Breaking off would compromise the bombing run. He had to trust his gunners. The waist gunners opened fire, their .50 caliber machine guns hammering. Spent shell casings cascaded through the aircraft. One Bf-109 peeled away, smoking. The other pressed the attack, cannon fire walking toward the bomber. Then a P-51 materialized from nowhere, guns blazing. The Bf-109 disintegrated. "Thanks for the save," Hawk radioed to the unknown P-51 pilot. "Buy me a beer when we get home," the fighter pilot responded before banking away to engage another target. The air battle raged for 15 minutes. German fighters threw everything they had at the formation, trying to break it up before it reached the Berghof. But the American escort fighters held them off. Losses were mounting on both sides, but the bomber formation remained intact. Part 7. Into the Alps. At 08:25 hours, the bomber formation began its descent, following the valleys west of Munich. This was the most dangerous part of the approach, flying at 15,000 feet through mountainous terrain, vulnerable to both fighters and flak. "Navigator, confirm position," Hawk called. "On course," Lieutenant Wright responded from his position in the nose. "Berghoff is 40 miles ahead, ETA 12 minutes. The mountains rose around them, massive peaks capped with snow, their slopes impossibly steep. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. One navigation error, one equipment failure, and they'd fly straight into a mountain. The German defenses in the Alps were formidable. 80mm flak guns positioned on mountain peaks began firing. Black puffs of smoke appeared around the formation as shells exploded at altitude. Each puff represented 22 pounds of steel fragments traveling at lethal velocity. A B-17 from the 303rd Bomb Group took a direct hit. Its right wing disintegrated. The bomber rolled inverted and fell, tumbling through the sky. Hawk watched, hoping to see parachutes. He counted 4 before the bomber disappeared behind a mountain ridge. The flak intensified. The Germans were throwing up a wall of steel. B-17s began taking damage. Engines smoking, wings holed, tail sections shredded, but the formation pressed on. "Target in sight," Lieutenant Fisher, the bombardier, called from the nose. "Berghoff dead ahead, 25 miles. Hawk could see it now. A cluster of buildings perched on a mountainside, surrounded by defense positions. Smoke generators were already operating, trying to obscure the target. But the clear weather worked in the bomber's favor. The Berghoff was visible. "Bomb bay doors open," Hawk ordered. All across the formation, bomb bay doors opened. The sleek B-17s suddenly looked like flying fortresses with their internal weapons exposed. Each aircraft carried 6,000 pounds of explosives. Together, the formation carried 140,000 pounds, 720 tons of destruction aimed at one target. Part 8, Bombs Away. The bomb run lasted 90 seconds. To the crews, it felt like an eternity. Flying straight and level at 15,000 feet, the B-17s were perfect targets for flak. German 88 8mm guns fired as fast as crews could load them. The sky became a nightmare of black smoke and screaming steel. B-17s were hit, shuddered, but kept flying. "Bombardier, you have control," Hawk said, relinquishing the aircraft to Lieutenant Fisher. In the nose, Fisher peered through his Norden bomb sight, making minute adjustments. The Berghoff filled his view, Hitler's personal residence, the Great Hall with its famous picture window, the surrounding barracks and administrative buildings. The mathematics were complex. The B-17 was traveling at 180 mph. The bombs would take approximately 20 seconds to fall from 15,000 feet. Wind, air pressure, temperature, all factored into the equation. The Norden bomb sight computed it all mechanically, adjusting the aiming point. "Steady, steady," Fisher called. "Bombs away." He pressed the release. 6,000 pounds of high explosive and incendiary bombs dropped from Memphis Belle II's bomb bay. All across the formation, 240 bombardiers pressed their releases simultaneously. 140,000 pounds of explosives fell toward the Berghoff. The first bombs hit at 0837 hours. A 500-pound high-explosive bomb struck the Great Hall, penetrating the roof before detonating inside. The famous picture window, where Hitler had posed for propaganda photos, exploded outward in a shower of glass and steel. More bombs followed in rapid succession. The residential wing was obliterated. The barracks buildings disappeared in expanding fireballs. The administrative complex collapsed. Secondary explosions indicated ammunition stores detonating. But the bombers weren't finished. The second wave of aircraft dropped their loads. Then the third. Then the fourth. For 3 minutes, the Berghoff complex was subjected to the most concentrated aerial bombardment in history. When the smoke cleared enough to assess damage, the results were devastating. Every major building in the complex had been hit. The Berghoff itself was a burning ruin. The terrain was cratered. Fires burned everywhere. "Target destroyed," someone radioed. "Hitler's house is gone." The formation turned for home. Part 9. Running the gauntlet. But the mission wasn't over. The bombers still had to fight their way back out of Germany. And the Luftwaffe was waiting. As the formation climbed back to altitude, exiting the Alps, German fighters swarmed. Bf-109s, Fw-190s, even a few Me-410 heavy fighters armed with 30mm cannons. The Germans knew this was a major raid and were throwing everything available into stopping the bombers' escape. The air battle was intense. P-51s and P-47s dueled with German fighters at 20,000 feet. Bomber gunners fired desperately at attackers pressing through the escort screen. Memphis Belle II took multiple hits. A 20mm cannon shell from an FW-190 tore through the right wing, missing the fuel tank by inches. Another shell exploded in the radio compartment, wounding Staff Sergeant Henderson. The top turret gunner shot down one attacker, then was hit himself by return fire. "How bad?" Hawk called back to the crew. "Henderson's hit in the leg, but stable," the flight engineer reported. "Top turret gunner took shrapnel, still conscious. We're losing fuel from the right wing, but the self-sealing tanks are doing their job. We can make it home." "All engines running?" Hawk asked. "All four good. We're lucky." Lucky. That was relative. All around them, B-17s were being shot down. A bomber from the 379th took a direct hit from a German fighter's rocket. It exploded. No survivors. Another from the 384th had two engines shot out and was falling behind the formation. Easy prey for fighters. The escort fighters fought desperately to protect the bombers. P-51 pilot Lieutenant William Shepard shot down 3 German fighters in 5 minutes, protecting the damaged B-17 from the 384th. He ran out of ammunition and still stayed with the crippled bomber, using his fighter to intimidate German pilots into breaking off their attacks. His courage saved the bomber and its crew. The running battle continued for 40 minutes as the formation fought its way out of German airspace. By the time they crossed back into Allied-controlled territory at 0925 hours, the cost was clear. Of 240 B-17s that had attacked the Berghof, 28 didn't return. Another 45 were heavily damaged. Casualties exceeded 300 men, killed, wounded, or missing. The escort fighters had lost 18 P-51s and 12 P-47s, but they'd protected the bombers well enough to complete the mission. As Memphis Belle II crossed the English coast at 10:45 hours, Hawk allowed himself to breathe. They'd done it. They'd bombed Hitler's personal fortress. They'd survived. "Nice flying, Lieutenant," Cooper said. "Nice bombing, everyone," Hawk replied. "Let's get these wounded men home." They landed at Bassingbourn at 11:15 hours. As Memphis Belle II taxied to its hard stand, Hawk counted the battle damage. 37 flak holes, 3 cannon shell strikes, 1 section of wing fabric torn away. The aircraft was a testament to the B-17's legendary toughness. As the crew climbed out, exhausted and traumatized, they were met by the ground crew chief. "How'd it go, Lieutenant?" Hawk smiled grimly. "Hitler's house just got foreclosed." Chapter 3, Aftermath. Part 10, The Debriefing. The debriefing lasted 4 hours. Crews from all 6 bomb groups reported their observations, their damage assessments, their losses. Intelligence officers compiled the reports into a comprehensive picture. The damage to the Berghof complex was catastrophic. Main residence 90% destroyed, Great Hall completely demolished, all support buildings heavily damaged or destroyed, infrastructure, roads, utilities destroyed, estimated casualties among SS guards and staff, 200, 300. But there was one crucial piece of information. Hitler had not been present. Intelligence reports confirmed he had been in Berlin on March 20th, attending meetings at the Reich Chancellery. Still, the psychological impact was enormous. Film from gun cameras and reconnaissance photos showed the complete destruction of Hitler's mountain sanctuary. The images were released to the press within hours. Newspaper headlines around the world proclaimed, "Hitler's fortress destroyed. American bombers strike at heart of Nazi Germany. Berghof reduced to ruins." The propaganda value was exactly what General Spaatz had predicted. The myth of Nazi invincibility took another serious blow. If the Führer's personal residence could be destroyed, what else could Allied air power achieve? Part 11. The German Reaction. In Berlin, the news of the Berghof's destruction arrived at the Reich Chancellery at 1000 hours on March 20th. Hitler was in a strategy meeting when an aide interrupted with the report. According to witnesses, Hitler's reaction was one of cold fury. He demanded immediate retribution. terror bombing of English cities, V-2 rocket attacks, anything to strike back. But his military commanders explained that Germany no longer had the resources for major retaliatory raids. The Luftwaffe was being systematically destroyed. V-2 production couldn't match demand. Hitler's mountain retreat, the place where he had entertained world leaders, where he had planned conquests, where he had felt invulnerable, had been reduced to rubble by American bombers operating in broad daylight. The psychological blow to German morale was significant. If Hitler's personal fortress could be destroyed so easily, how could Germany win the war? The bombing of the Berghof became one more piece of evidence that the Reich was doomed. German propaganda tried to minimize the damage, claiming the Berghof was of no military significance and that the raid had been a wasteful American gesture. But the photos told a different story. The world could see that Hitler's sanctuary had been obliterated. Part 12. The cost. But the raid's success came at a terrible price. 28 B-17s lost meant 280 crew members were dead, wounded, or prisoners. Each loss represented a tragedy. Young men who would never go home, families who would receive devastating telegrams, futures that would never be realized. Lieutenant Robert Hawk Hawkins attended memorial services for crews from the 91st Bomb Group who didn't return. He stood at attention as the chaplain read names, as the band played taps, as empty chairs stood in formation representing the missing. One of those names was his best friend, Lieutenant Mark Sullivan, pilot of Carolina Belle. Sullivan's B-17 had been shot down by fighters during the extraction. 3 crew members had bailed out and were POWs. 7, including Sullivan, had died. Was it worth it? Cooper asked Hawk after the ceremony. Hawk thought about the question. Ask me when the war's over. If bombing the Berghof helped end this thing even one day earlier, then yeah, it was worth it. But God, I hate that we lost so many. They knew the risks. Knowing doesn't make it easier. Part 13. The Legacy. In the months following the Berghof raid, Allied bombing of Germany intensified. The 8th Air Force flew larger and larger missions, destroying oil refineries, aircraft factories, rail yards, and cities. The Luftwaffe fought desperately but was overwhelmed by Allied numbers and technological superiority. The psychological impact of the Berghof bombing reverberated through Germany. When Allied forces invaded France on June 6, 1944, D-Day, German defenders fought bravely but without the conviction they'd once had. The myth of Nazi invincibility had been shattered. Hitler never returned to the Berghof. The ruins remained untouched for the remainder of the war. In May 1945, when American troops occupied Berchtesgaden, they found the Obersalzberg complex still in ruins from the March 1944 raid. The destruction was so complete that Hitler had never attempted to rebuild. After the war, the remaining structures were demolished. Today, only foundations remain, along with extensive bunker systems that have become tourist attractions. But the Berghof itself, Hitler's fortress in the Alps, exists only in photographs and history books, destroyed by American bombers on that March day in 1944. The men who flew Operation Valkyrie's Hammer went on to fly more missions. Some completed their tours and went home. Some were shot down on later raids. Some survived the war only to struggle with what they'd seen and done. Hawk completed 35 missions, received the Distinguished Flying Cross, and returned to Tennessee in October 1944. He never talked much about the war, but he kept a photo in his office. Memphis Belle II in flight over Germany, bomb bay doors open, on its way to bomb the Berghof. That was the day, he would tell his grandchildren years later, that we showed the world that evil has no sanctuary, that no matter how high the fortress, no matter how strong the defenses, justice will find a way. We didn't win the war that day, but we proved it could be won. The epilogue. What really happened. For decades after the war, veterans of the 8th Air Force would gather at reunions and tell stories of their missions. One story that circulated widely was the Berghof raid, the day American bombers supposedly destroyed Hitler's mountain fortress in a massive daylight attack. The story grew with each telling. The number of bombers increased. The defenses became more formidable. the damage more complete. It became one of those legendary missions that everyone had heard about, but few could verify, because it never happened. Author's note: this was fiction. Everything you just read was alternate history, science fiction. Operation Valkyrie's hammer never occurred. This story was created for entertainment purposes only. What really happened? The Berghof was not bombed in a major raid in 1944. While the 8th Air Force conducted numerous raids on German targets throughout 1944 and 1945, Hitler's mountain retreat was never the target of a major daylight bombing mission. The Berghof's actual fate. April 25, 1945. British Royal Air Force bombers attacked the Obersalzberg complex as part of broader operations in the final days of the war. May 4, 1945. Retreating SS troops set fire to the Berghof to prevent it from falling into Allied hands intact. May 1945. American forces captured the ruins. 1952. Bavarian government demolished the remaining structures. Why this mission never happened. 1. Strategic value. Military planners considered the Berghof to have minimal strategic importance. Bombing it would be primarily symbolic. 2. Difficulty. The location in the Alps made it an extremely difficult target requiring perfect weather and creating high risk of losses. 3. Resource allocation. Bombers were needed for strategic targets like oil refineries and aircraft factories that had direct military impact. 4. Hitler's presence. Intelligence rarely confirmed Hitler's location at the Berghof with certainty, making timing a major challenge. What was real? The U.S. 8th Air Force conducted massive daylight bombing raids throughout 1944. B-17 Flying Fortress bombers and P-51 Mustang escorts did penetrate deep into Germany. Losses on some raids exceeded 20% of aircraft committed. The courage and sacrifice of bomber crews was exactly as portrayed. The psychological warfare value of strategic bombing was real. Why write this fiction? This alternate history explores the incredible courage of WW-2 bomber crews while examining the psychological dimensions of strategic bombing. The story honors real airmen who flew real missions facing real dangers, while imagining what if one of the most symbolic targets had been attacked. The real heroes. Between 1942 and 1945, the U.S. 8th Air Force flew 350,000 sorties, dropped 640,000 tons of bombs, and suffered 47,000 casualties, including 26,000 dead. These men deserve to be remembered for what they actually did, not for fictional missions. Learn real aviation history. Research actual 8th Air Force missions. Visit the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. Read memoirs by bomber crew members. Watch documentaries about the strategic bombing campaign. Honor veterans by learning their true stories. This story was fiction. Real history is extraordinary enough without embellishment. But understood this was fiction? If you enjoyed this alternate history thriller, subscribe for more creative stories, hit like, and share. Comment. Should we do more WW-2 alternate history? What real mission should we cover next? Turn on notifications. D'accord, final disclaimer. This story was complete fiction, an alternate history science fiction exploration of what-if scenarios. All characters except historical figures like General Spaatz were fictional. The mission described never happened. Any resemblance to actual events was coincidental or used for dramatic effect within a fictional framework. Respect to real veterans. The men who actually flew bomber missions in WW-2 deserve our respect and gratitude. This story was written to honor their courage while exploring alternate history, not to deceive or misrepresent actual events. Educational purpose. This story was created to entertain while teaching about the realities of strategic bombing, the courage required, and the costs paid. Real WW-2 history offers countless incredible true stories that need no embellishment. Thank you for reading this work of fiction.